Shalom, friends. It has been a while. Today, on this episode of the Watchdog, we have some very exciting things to discuss for you guys. Although some of the stuff we're going to be discussing is anything but exciting and, in fact, actually a little horrifying. Do judges actually endorse violence against pro-life supporters? Is the pro-life movement losing even in the most conservative areas? And are we getting to a point in activism where waging warfare at all is simply impossible? We'll discuss this and more on today's episode of The Watchdog. Shalom, friends, and welcome to today's episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are indeed living in biblical times. If you are here with us, I want to go ahead and say shaloms all around to anybody who is currently joining us. If you're here, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember, you can leave any questions, comments, criticisms, critiques, concerns, or anything of that nature in the comment section down below. Sorry, I'm getting something up here on my screen. I have a screen over this direction that I actually should have had set up already. That's why I get to read comments and things of that nature. At any rate, remember, there are various places you can follow us. For example, various social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Gab, Minds, Parler, Twitter. I already said Facebook, sorry, X, which is the same thing as Twitter. I'm all over the place right now. Truth Social, right? If you're on any of these platforms, please do consider following us on these various platforms, as well as sharing this video to those platforms. Please do remember to go to the Rumble account. The Rumble account is incredibly important for a couple reasons. Number one, subscribing and following us on Rumble allows you to get content in the event that it's taken down here. Also, if this channel at all were in total were to get nuked, it would also help tremendously in that, because obviously at that point that would be the only place where you would be able to get some of our content, or any of our content for that matter. And on top of that, it puts pressure on YouTube, right? Rumble is directly competing with YouTube, right? And by supporting those people who actually compete with YouTube, you're actually doing two different things. Number one, you're putting pressure on YouTube to stop doing the things that we dislike, namely censoring free speech and disallowing people to use this platform for open dialogue within reason, of course. Obviously, I understand them getting rid of like ISIS content and stuff like that. You know what I mean? This is a company, and they're all allowed to run the company how they want. But if people are no longer using it, guess what? They're not going to run it in the way that they're currently running it. So it puts pressure on them. It also rewards Rumble for actually being pro-free speech, right? Which is something we should definitely want to do. So please do consider following us on the Rumble account if you fancy. If you don't fancy, well, I don't care. But I'm just kidding. I do care a little bit. Anyway, today is December 19th, 2025. We'll, of course, like to do a This Day in History fun fact. But before we do This Day in History, I would like to say Chag Sameach to all those who celebrate, or Happy Hanukkah, if you'd like to hear it in English, although technically it'd be Chag Hanukkah Sameach, right? If I were to say the whole thing, right? Nevertheless, we are currently in the 7th day, no, sixth day of Hanukkah. So, obviously, as you guys know, I am a Christian Jew, and so we do celebrate Hanukkah here in my household, and just want to say, for all those who do celebrate, a happy Hanukkah to you, and I hope that you guys are having more fun than some others have been having. Unfortunately, we'll be talking about some of that stuff today as everything goes, as we press forward here. Our This Day in History fun fact, though, is going to be from December the 19th, 1828. When Vice President of the United States, John C. Calhoun, sparked what was known as the nullification crisis. He anonymously published a treatise called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, which was a protest against the tariff of 1828, written, like we said, in December of 1828 and published on December 19th of 1828. The tariff of 1828 was exactly what it sounds like. It was a highly protective tariff, became law in May 19th, 1828. And it was one of those bills that was actually kind of designed to fall through, right? The vast majority of Congress was seen to be in support of free trade at that time. And so the bill was designed to fail and turned out not to fail, which ended up sparking the nullification crisis. So what exactly is the nullification crisis? Well, basically, the state of South Carolina started to argue that the tariff of 1828, as well as the tariff of 1832 eventually, were unconstitutional. They were the United States federal government going outside of its constitutionally given parameters. And because of the fact that it was unconstitutional, it was actually null and void, hence the nullification crisis. The state of South Carolina was saying that they were nullifying that tariff, and that, in fact, within the boundaries of South Carolina, they would not actually allow for the tariff to be enforced. Now, this very famously led to the resigning of John C. Calhoun from the vice presidency. It also led to, very nearly at least, the American Civil War. It did lead to the American Civil War in a sort of long-term sense, but it very nearly led to a short-term American Civil War. And let me explain exactly what I mean by that. So, Congress on March 1st, 1833, passed what was known as the Force Bill. And the Force Bill was essentially authorizing President Andrew Jackson to use military force against South Carolina in order to enforce federal law, in this case, the tariffs of 1828 and of 1832, right? So that in and of itself was very massive, and you could easily see, if he did decide to march into South Carolina in order to enforce this law, which South Carolina was claiming was unconstitutional, you could very easily have seen the American Civil War begin right then and there in 1833, right? Ultimately, South Carolina on March 15th, 1833, ended up repealing its nullification ordinance in response to not only the Force Bill, but also a new tariff, the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which was satisfactory to those in the South who disagreed with it, right? It was, one of those great compromise kind of bills that Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun actually both worked on together. Henry Clay, of course, known as the Great Compromiser, not just for this, but for various other things he did as well. The Great Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, so on and so forth. The state of South Carolina did nullify the Force Bill, which ended up kind of being symbolic because it was never used anyhow. But you can kind of see how that escalation was taking place there and how it was a really big deal. And there are many, myself included, who would argue that the nullification crisis eventually did lead to the American Civil War, although not alone. It's not like the sole cause. Obviously, slavery was a huge cause. Obviously, the different understandings of federal power versus state power was a huge cause. The Civil War, like any war, was going to be multi-causal. But the animosity that had been building up over the South, in the South rather, for the North, and in the North for the South over decades, really almost reached a fever pitch in 1832 with the nullification crisis. And the nullification crisis really exposed that fundamental difference in theories of government that the South and the North had, right? The South, as evidenced by the nullification crisis, very strongly believed in the sovereignty of the states. They believed that the 10th Amendment, which says that any duties and rights not expressly given to or withheld from the federal government by the Constitution are put in the hands of the states, right? And they took that very seriously to say, okay, that means that the states are all but sovereign. And if we think that this law is unconstitutional, which to be fair, it may have been, I don't know that it does seem to me like there's a very solid argument against that idea, but there's an argument for it as well, right? If this tariff of 1828, and the later tariff of 1832, if they were unconstitutional, then we as the state of South Carolina actually have a right to nullify it within our borders, right? That's their theory of government. You can see how they have a very high emphasis on things like states' rights and state sovereignty. On the flip side, even though Andrew Jackson himself was from Tennessee, you can see how the northern states, those who were not in the South, they have this very strong idea of, and actually this all started with John Quincy Adams. 1828 is when he was president in 1828 is my point. They had an idea that no, actually, we need a strong centralized federal government that should be allowed to pass laws like the 1828 tariff, and the states need to toe the line if we decide to pass those laws. So you have actually two different things that end up leading to the Civil War here. Number one, you have decades of animosity being built up that, of course, it doesn't end or even begin with the nullification crisis. This is just another massive chain in the animosity, another massive link in the animosity chain, to go with, the Great Compromise of 1820, Compromise of 1850, some of the arguments that people would get in, during the Constitutional Convention, the Federalist, Anti-Federalist controversies, John Brown, Nat Turner, there's a lot of things that built this up. But the nullification crisis is definitely a big part of that animosity, right? So that's the first thing. But then the second thing, it also exposes how deep and long held the rift between states' rights Southerners and strong centralized federal government Northerners actually was, right? And by the way, none of that is to deny the central role of slavery in the Civil War. The Civil War was absolutely about slavery just as much as it was about states' rights. It's just that, unlike, in the modern day, we take the lost cause view, it's about states' rights, or we take the mainstream view, it's about slavery. When the reality is it's about both and other things still. Virtually every war in the history of this world has been multi-causal, and certainly the American Civil War was no different. So, at any rate, December 19th, 1828 is when the nullification crisis kind of officially started. And it started with the publication, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. Started with the publication of South Carolina Exposition and Protest. So that's our This Day in History fun fact. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's go ahead and move on to certain points here, or to the video for today, right? So, as you guys know, before we get into the articles, I do like to discuss kind of a general idea, right? And there's been a lot of controversy on the Twitter sphere over the Buckley versus Buchanan disputes from the 1990s. William F. Buckley and Pat Buchanan disputes in the 1990s for what you might term the heart and soul of conservatism. And a lot of people have been making parallels of that to the modern day disputes between guys like Ben Shapiro on the one end and Tucker Carlson on the other. Some people would add Candace Owens in with the Tucker Carlson group. I personally think that Candace is her own special flavor of completely insane. And I would not, as much as I disagree with Tucker on some of these issues, I would not put Tucker in that same category personally. But a lot of people have been not only comparing the Buckley-Buchanan battle to the Shapiro-Carlson battle, but they have also been kind of relitigating and commenting upon the Buckley-Buchanan battle. And for those of you who don't know, Pat Buchanan was really considered kind of the figurehead of the paleoconservative movement in the late 1880s and 1990s. Not late 1990s, just the entire 1990s, right? And Pat Buchanan, first off, what is paleoconservatism, right? Paleoconservatism, in first off, let's just say very plainly, in the eyes of many people, myself included, is a much purer form of conservatism than most of what we see in the modern day right, whether that be the neocons or Trumpism, right? The paleoconservative view is a view which stresses Christian ethics, regionalism, non-intervention, and American nationalism. And depending on who exactly you talk to, also stresses traditionalist Russell Kirk, Edmund Burke style conservatism. I actually have a book here that I'd like to recommend for you guys. The Reactionary Imperative by M.E. Bradford. M.E. Bradford is while Pat Buchanan was kind of the figurehead of the paleoconservative movement, M.E. Bradford is kind of the intellectual godfather of the paleoconservative movement. He's probably done more than any other political theorist to explain clearly and formulate paleoconservatism as an ideology. And mostly from this work, this is probably his most important work, The Reactionary Imperative. He would self-identify as a traditionalist conservative. He actually did not like the term paleoconservative, which was coined actually by Paul Gottfried, who ironically also ended up coining the term alt-right, but that's a conversation for another time. Paul Gottfried being also a fairly popular paleoconservative. And Pat Buchanan also would identify in some instances as a traditionalist, although in other instances he certainly is different than your traditionalist. Russell Kirk endorsed him in 1992, Russell Kirk being kind of the intellectual godfather of American traditionalist conservatism. Actually, if I could share with you guys another book here. Oh, is it not up here? Well, you consider also, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, purchasing The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk. Man, I must not have put that away when I was reading it last. That's unfortunate. Anyways, absolutely great work, and you can see, where some of those ideas come from as well. But anyways, Kirk did end up endorsing Buchanan in 1992, but they also had various differences. Tone was a big one. I know that might seem small, but Russell Kirk very much stressed the careful and cautious nature of his style of conservatism, whereas Pat Buchanan was very rah-rah, very let's kind of get the masses together. Pat Buchanan was a populist, and Russell Kirk famously despised populism. And they disagreed exactly on the subject of nationalism, although the way they disagreed is probably a little bit too nuanced for us to get in this video. Maybe it could be the subject for like a Watchdog special report at some point. But suffice it to say, Pat Buchanan was very comfortable calling himself a nationalist, as are paleoconservatives generally. And Russell Kirk and traditionalist conservatives generally tend to not like terms like nationalism. They tend not to like collectivism in general, and they see nationalism usually as a form of collectivism. Although, again, there's a lot of nuance in that, I got to stress, and Russell Kirk himself was certainly a nationalist in some capacities, right? At any rate, again, paleoconservatism stresses American nationalism, regionalism, traditionalist conservatism, non-intervention, Christian ethics, and it is very much a populist ideal, right? The paleocons tend to be very much against things like centralization of federal policy. They tend to advocate things like human nature, tradition, and reason, especially M.E. Bradford. Again, he self-identified as a traditionalist conservative, right? They tended to be very protectionist. In fact, a lot of Trump's protectionist ideals have actually come from the paleocons. Trump himself is not a paleocon. However, there is some overlap there. Paleocons tended to be very strong on social issues, right? Being opposed to things like abortion and gay marriage and LGBT rights, divorce, pornography, so on and so forth. They, of course, being into protectionism, were not really into free trade, right? And they also were very much not into interventionism. I think calling them isolationists is not fair, to be perfectly frank with you. A lot of people do term paleocons isolationists. I don't think that's an accurate representation of Gottfried. I don't think that's an accurate representation of Bradford. And I don't think that's an accurate representation of Buchanan. And they each have, their individual thinkers, their own individual thought. But nevertheless, that was kind of the crux of the non-interventionist part was kind of the crux of their appeal to a lot of people, was that they strongly believed in not getting involved in foreign wars and stuff like that. They tended to be very pro-Israel or Israel. This is not to say that all paleocons are anti-Israel, but at the very least, Pat Buchanan certainly had tremendous opposition to Israel. And, Tucker Carlson is considered by some to be kind of a modern representation of the paleocon movement. He has a tremendous opposition to our funding of Israel. Paul Gottfried has had a tremendous opposition to our funding of Israel. It is important to note Paul Gottfried is a Jew, because a lot of people would accuse all anti-Zionists of being anti-Semitic. That's not true. If you're anti-Semitic, you're an anti-Zionist, but that does not mean all anti-Zionists are anti-Semitic, right? And actually, this is an area where the traditionalist guys like Russell Kirk actually greatly agreed with the paleocons, right? And Pat Buchanan and all that, right? Now, the kind of high water mark of this movement was 1992, when Pat Buchanan challenged George H.W. Bush for the Republican Party nomination, right? And ultimately, he ended up losing, and he did ultimately end up conceding and endorsing George H.W. Bush. In fact, he gave his famous culture war speech at the Republican National Convention where he was endorsing George H.W. Bush, right? But during the 1992 election cycle, there was a lot of dispute about these issues, right? And William F. Buckley, the founder of National Review and arguably the most influential figure in American conservative politics, maybe ever. One could argue for like Ronald Reagan, Ron Paul, Barry Goldwater. Those guys could compete certainly, and Russell Kirk even. Those guys could compete certainly. But there's an argument to be made that William F. Buckley is the single most influential conservative in American history, at least 20th century forward, right? He founded the National Review and kind of created the fusion conservatism, right? Where he would take neocons, traditionalists, libertarians, get them to all agree on the things they could agree on, and then push that agenda rather than fracturing into three separate groups that likely would never be able to win, anything on their own. That's why modern American conservatism, it tends to have strong elements of traditionalist conservatism, right? Such as religious conservatism, opposition to abortion and contraception and pornography and things of that nature. But also on the other end, it tends to have a lot of neoconservative elements to it as well. For example, anti-communism was very popular back, before the fall of the Soviet Union, and other forms of interventionism to this day, right? Also, a lot of libertarian elements found their way into modern day conservatism, these ideas of keep the federal government as small as possible, calling the federal government a necessary evil, taxation being theft, audit the Fed, that kind of stuff. The reason those views, which come from different conservative political ideologies, are all found in the mainstream of American conservatism is largely because of this fusion conservative movement that was largely the brainchild of National Review and William F. Buckley. So you have some background there. Okay, so what was the dispute? Well, because Pat Buchanan was prone to saying things that a lot of people interpreted as being anti-Semitic, there was a lot of dispute about whether or not he himself was anti-Semitic. And there were other things that people added on top of that as well. Is Pat Buchanan a racist? A lot of people would question. Is Pat Buchanan a potential autocrat? Does he have fascistic tendencies? A lot of people would question that as well. And William F. Buckley famously wrote In Search of Anti-Semitism, an over 40,000 word article, massive article. And in fact, he ended up turning it into a book, discussing issues of conservative anti-Semitism, right? And in that what do you call it? Sorry, article. My apologies. He rather famously said that while he did not think Pat Buchanan was an anti-Semite himself, he did think that Pat Buchanan had said some rather anti-Semitic things. Which, for the record, I happen to largely agree with that point. I don't know if I go back and forth sometimes, because sometimes it's like, man, Pat, you really do like aligning yourself with guys who really don't like Jews. But on the other end, a lot of the stuff he said is perfectly within bounds, and it could just be that he was, he's a lot like Martin Luther and Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson, in the sense that he's like, he wants to grab you, right? He's got a very attention-grabbing style. At any rate, this dispute, in the eyes of many today, led to the excommunication, if you will, of Pat Buchanan from the conservative movement, which, to be perfectly frank with you, as much as I do tend to agree with what Buckley had to say about Buchanan, I think was a mistake. Pat Buchanan, I think, was a very strong-willed person, and that can sometimes create problems. But guess what? Sometimes it also has a lot of benefit. And to be honest with you, the country would probably be a lot better today had Pat Buchanan won the 1992 election instead of Bill Clinton, which of course would necessarily mean Pat Buchanan won the 1992 Republican primary convention instead of George H.W. Bush. He ran again in 96 and 2000. They never quite attained the same, those campaigns never quite attained to the same heights as what we got in 92, which is funny, actually, because a very similar thing happened with Ross Perot, but I digress on that. And the paleoconservative movement kind of ended up dying. You could argue that there are elements of paleoconservatism in Trumpism, but Trumpism, by and large, is not the same thing as what Pat Buchanan had stood for. The Constitution Party certainly has strong paleoconservative elements. Paul Gottfried has left the movement entirely and considers himself alt-right now. Or dissident right is another way he terms it. And there are some guys, I think you could argue for, like, the cross-politic guys, Doug Wilson, John Harris. There are certainly some guys out there who, even Stephen Wolf in a lot of ways, and I know those guys don't agree on everything, but they all have elements of paleoconservatism in their respective political ideologies, as do I, for the record. I wanted to give a little bit of my thoughts on this dispute because I think that, unfortunately, with the polarized nature of modern American politics, the truth is often the only thing we don't discover. We discover how everybody feels about every issue. The truth is very often the only thing that doesn't actually come to light in these regards, because people are so biased, and because people are so polarized, and because people are so unwilling to say, hey, well, I disagree, but actually you have a fairly good point. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. First of all, I wanted to say, in regards to the overall issue, we can start off by saying anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, okay? Now, I say that as somebody who, as you guys know, self-identifies as a Zionist, okay? I consider myself a nationalist for all nations, just like I believe the Irish have a right to self-determination and sovereignty in the borders of their own homeland. I also believe the Jews have a right to self-determination and sovereignty in the borders of their own homeland, which is what the definition of Zionism is. So I'm just as much a Zionist as an Irish nationalist, and I guess maybe not just as much for those two, but I would consider myself an American nationalist as well, and even first and foremost, right? That being said, Zionism is not necessarily anti-Semitism. Now, it is true that all anti-Semites will inevitably be anti-Zionists, right? There's no shock when somebody like Candace Owens reveals herself to be an anti-Zionist, because she's an anti-Semite. She says deeply anti-Semitic things. She pushes blood libel myths, like Jews and rabbis are out there torturing and drinking the blood of Christian children so that they can get some magical healing properties, or Jews control the world, or, her most recent one, Israel killed Charlie Kirk, right? Although at this point she's accused, everybody and their dog of killing Charlie Kirk, but I digress. So she's an anti-Semite, and therefore she is an anti-Zionist. But on the flip side of that, I think Tucker Carlson would be considered anti-Zionist, and I don't think we can say that he is anti-Semitic. I think that every now and then, because Tucker is a little stinker and he likes to stir the pot, he'll say things that sound vaguely anti-Semitic. Like for example, when he referred to those who killed Jesus as hummus eaters, it's like, okay, we know where you're getting at, right? But I don't think that actually comes from a place of Tucker disliking Jews. I think it comes from a place of Tucker. He's a little bit of a showboat, right? He likes to grab people's attention. He works in the media, right? And Paul Gottfried, of course, is a Jew, so obviously he's an anti-Zionist. He can't be anti-Semitic. He's a Jew. I mean, that's just sort of finished there. In fact, a lot of Jews are anti-Zionist, especially within the ultra-Orthodox, communities. There is religious Zionists that exist, and even Haredi Zionists, which exist, especially in the Kahanist movement, those who follow the ideology of Meir Kahana. But by and large, Haredi Jews, famously or more popularly known as ultra-Orthodox Jews, are actually mostly anti-Zionist, right? So, there is a distinction to be made there. With that being said, I think it is plain to me that there was enough ambiguity in the things that Pat Buchanan would say that one could reasonably accuse Pat Buchanan of anti-Semitism. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and read some of the things that Pat Buchanan said, so that you guys can make you can decide for yourself, basically, right? But let's go ahead and pull some of this. This is from the Wikipedia, right? So, Buchanan has famously argued that Adolf Hitler did not want war and that the Allied powers' actions were unnecessary, which, of course, on top of being, weirdly apologetic to Nazis, is also just flatly not true. He, of course, very famously invaded Austria. They ended up wanting him to invade. There's no doubt about that, but nevertheless, he did do that and annex it. He invaded, of course, the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. He invaded Poland, despite the fact that Winston Churchill told him this is a line in the sand. If you invade Poland, we will declare war. And, of course, the fact of the matter is invasion is an act of military aggression. So somebody might say, well, yeah, but he invaded Poland. That doesn't mean he wanted war with Britain. Okay, but he did want war, no doubt, because he sent troops into Poland and they ransacked the place and raped the women and killed the Jews and slaughtered the infants and all this other. I mean, the war crimes that Nazis committed, especially in Eastern Europe, because they saw the Slavs as beneath them, are horrifying. The Slavs and Poles and Russians are horrifying, right? So it's just flatly false, and also weirdly borders on Nazi apologism, right? He also famously used the 70th anniversary of the German invasion of Poland, which is September 2009, to argue that the UK should not have declared war on Nazi Germany, that they had no right to do so, which again is like weirdly apologetic to the Hitlerian cause, right? In 1991, excuse me, that's a different point. I want to set that aside for now. Buchanan in 1982 very famously defended John Demjanjuk, I think is how you say his name, who was charged with being a Nazi war criminal responsible for the mass murder of Jews at Treblinka. Okay. He was famously known as Ivan the Terrible, right? And it did end up turning out, he claimed that Demjanjuk was the victim of mistaken identity, right? And that he actually had not been a Nazi war criminal at all. Which, to be fair, it is important to note that he wasn't defending a Nazi. As far as he saw it, it is true he was defending somebody who was not a Nazi from the charges that he, in fact, was a Nazi. I've said the word Nazi so much, it's a good thing this particular channel isn't monetized yet. Now, ultimately, Demjanjuk did end up being convicted for being a Nazi war criminal. Of course, whether or not people buy that, you guys can go look into it and make your own, reach your own conclusion. Sorry. But Buchanan was trying to, while he was still a member of the Reagan administration, was trying to make sure guys like Demjanjuk and others who were suspected of being Nazi war criminals were actually not deported and therefore not tried for their crimes. Another famous example of this was Karl Linus. This led many, like, for example, there was a guy, if I look here on the Wikipedia, it'll actually mention it because I am reading these so that I get the details right. Menachem Rosensaft. This led guys like Menachem Rosensaft to say that, they basically opined that it's very interesting how often Buchanan seems to have sympathy for Nazi war criminals, right? He doesn't seem to have the same sympathy for, like, members of the IDF or Zionists, for example. Now, Buchanan did respond to this by saying he thought that the obsession with revenge on the part of Israeli Nazi hunters was unhealthy and dissuaded from the possibility not only that somebody could potentially be repentant, but also could eventually lead to cases of mistaken identity where people were prosecuted for crimes they did not commit. Nevertheless, this is kind of a third thing now, right? It's like, oh, well, Hitler never really wanted war. Also, the UK really had no right to declare war on Hitler. Also, all these different guys who've been accused of being Nazi war criminals, we really shouldn't deport them and they shouldn't be charged. You know what I mean? It's like there's a pattern of behavior that was worrisome to a lot of people there. Buchanan also very famously wrote a book. Excuse me. Where he essentially blamed the Allies for starting World War II, and essentially said that there was, nothing, that the Nazi Germany didn't do anything wrong in the buildup to World War II, which again is just like, okay, that's weird that's just very strange. Why do you believe that? So this is this is another element of this that it just makes it strange. And I keep listing these just to say, like, or his accusation back in the 90s that Gaza was a concentration camp, which, people can have their opinions on the modern war. It's still stupid to say that Israel's committing a genocide, in my opinion. But the fact that he was parroting this language 30 years ago, before there was any sort of serious military action being taken against Gaza, the likes of which we've seen in the last 3 years, is just another one thing that's just weird. You know what I mean? And so Buchanan certainly, if he wasn't an anti-Semite, he rode the fence, right? And Buckley took serious issue with this, Buckley being somebody who was quite friendly with a lot of Jews and who wanted to see anti-Semitism purged from the ranks of conservatism, while also allowing for honest disagreement here. One of Buckley's closest friends was Russell Kirk, and Russell Kirk very famously said, there are many who mistake Washington, D.C. for Tel Aviv. In other words, he was against the idea that we have to give so much support to Israel. Russell Kirk was certainly not an anti-Semite, and Buckley never accused him of being an anti-Semite, right? Nor did he ever want to see guys like Kirk and Bradford and those guys actually purged from the movement. Now, Buckley, as I said, did argue that Buchanan did not actually, was not actually an anti-Semite himself. Rather, he said he had said some very anti-Semitic things. And this is in his article, In Search of Anti-Semitism, which again is 40,000 words. He said, and I quote, "I find it impossible to defend Pat Buchanan against the charge that what he did and said during the period under examination amounted to anti-Semitism." But he also said, if you ask, do I think Pat Buchanan is an anti-Semite? My answer is that he is not one, but I think he has said some anti-Semitic things, right? And to be honest with you, I think that is largely true. I think it's very difficult to argue against that. The only way you could argue against that, to be honest, would be to go the other direction and say, actually, he is anti-Semitic. Pat Buchanan was anti-Semitic. I don't think the option that that he did not say anti-Semitic things is an option. It's either he's not an anti-Semite, but he rides the fence, or he is an anti-Semite. Those are really the only two viable options. So William F. Buckley was largely correct in his understanding of Pat Buchanan's disposition towards Jews. However, and this is where the issue can get kind of complicated, Pat Buchanan also, for all of his other ideas, was one of the better conservative voices in American political history. And the reality is, sometimes that is just the case. What do I mean by that is just the case? Sometimes it just is the case that the best representative of conservative values in politics has some major flaws. In fact, I'd argue usually that's the case. You know, Barry Goldwater famously went off the libertarian deep end and started saying that the government has no right to criminalize abortion and stuff like that. Stuff that conservatives such as myself would find horrific. And yet in 1964, when he ran, Barry Goldwater was by a mile and a half the most conservative presidential candidate in decades, probably since Calvin Coolidge, right? Decades. Calvin Coolidge last ran in 1924. So 40 years, right? Now he ended up winning, so I guess you can say 36 years. But far more conservative than Eisenhower, who I even like for the record, far more conservative than Thomas Dewey. I guess you could say Robert Taft. It has a solid claim to being at least as conservative as Goldwater, but also Robert Taft never won the nomination, right? He ran in 1948, he ran in 1952, and I think he ran a third time, but I don't remember when. But he never won the nomination. He lost to Dewey in 48, and he lost to Eisenhower in 52, and had he won in 52, he would have died in office anyway, because he died in 53, right? So you could argue for Robert Taft. Robert Taft used to have, he famously was called Mr. Conservative, but the point of the matter remains that despite going off the libertarian deep end later in life, Barry Goldwater was one of the better representations of conservative values in American political history. It's just a fact, right? Likewise, Ron Paul. Ron Paul has areas that I strongly disagree with. For example, he does not believe that the government, state or federal, has any real right to regulate drugs. I happen to think marijuana should be legalized, but not because I don't think the government has a right to regulate drugs. They absolutely have a right to regulate drugs. The federal government does not. I'll give them that. The state governments certainly have a right to regulate drugs. There's no doubt about that. And that goes all the way down to cigarettes, for the record. Do I think cigarettes should be illegal? No. But the state does have a right to pass that. Just read the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. They absolutely have a right to pass that law, right? So Pat Buchanan falls into that category, in my opinion. If I lived in 1992, and again, I'm a self-identified Christian Jew, I 100% would have voted for Pat Buchanan. There's no doubt about it, right? Because his views regarding American nationalism, Christian ethics, traditionalism, economic protectionism, needing to control the immigration that he famously predicted and was proven 100% right would suffocate us as a superpower. He was right about all those things. And if the only downside to electing him is that he harbors personal views that I don't appreciate, well, guess what? The vast majority of presidents throughout United States history were racist. I don't like that. But if that's not something you're enacting in policy, I don't care. You know what I mean? Theodore Roosevelt was a eugenicist. Theodore Roosevelt believed in white supremacism. He believed that white people were superior to the other races. But he didn't govern in a way that was tyrannical towards blacks, Hispanics, Jews, etc. So I don't care. You know what I mean? And I think there's a similar thing that we can say here with Buchanan, right? Buchanan, if Buchanan is not victimizing American Jews, then I could care less if he harbors some kind of personal resentment towards Jews. You keep it to yourself, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that, right? So this puts us in a weird place, right? Where, and I've been going for 45 minutes. I haven't even talked about the main subject of the show. This gets us in a weird place where, is there a right side to the Buckley-Buchanan issue? Because Buckley's diagnosis of Buchanan's anti-Semitic sentiments is largely accurate. And yet at the same time, Buchanan should not have been excommunicated from the conservative movement. And if we can chew the meat, spit out the bones, we should be able to realize that Buchanan actually is one of the better conservative politicians in American history, right? Well, this then gets to and I'm not going to provide an answer for that as far as whether or not it's the right answer. I'm going to move on to something else, which is this now gets into the same dispute between Tucker and Ben. It's a little bit different this time around, though. And the reason is because Tucker was one of the better voices in American conservatism and is no longer. And that's a big problem. Tucker Carlson is not only parroting wild conspiracy theories about World War II like Buchanan did and seemingly straddling the fence of anti-Semitism with comments like the hummus eaters and all that. But he also, has been talking about how Islam is actually positive and Sharia law is actually a positive force in the world. And we shouldn't be as distrustful of Muslims as we are and all that kind of stuff, right? That's obviously ridiculous. He has been defending all of America's enemies. And, the Putin thing was one thing. I think there's a case to be made that Vladimir Putin is unfairly maligned in the Western media. And in fact, I actually quite loved Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin. I thought it was very informative. And that's not to say that Vladimir Putin's a good guy, by the way. My opinion on Vladimir Putin is that he's not as evil as the media makes him out to be. And that also he's still evil. You know what I mean? But after that, it's defense of North Korea, it's defense of China, it's defense of Iran, right? It's all of America's enemies he seems to be defending. Well, that's weird, right? Also, his defense of not only Kanye West with all his weird anti-Semitic drivel and conspiracy theories, but also his defense of Andrew Tate, who is if the rape charges are false, which I think there's very good evidence that they're not. I think that Andrew Tate almost certainly is a rapist and a sex trafficker. But even if those are false, he admits to being a pornographer. He admits to using the quote-unquote nice guy method to try and get girls under his sway so that he can sell their OnlyFans accounts and make money off of them, right? He's admitted to striking women also. The dude is deeply, he's not patriarchal, right? He's not somebody who believes in male headship or something. He's deeply misogynistic in a way that's almost humorous. Then you have, of course, Tucker's defense of Nick Fuentes. Similar thing. Nick Fuentes is a self-described Hitler lover, is a self-described authoritarian, is a self-described fascist, is a self-described incel, is a self-described racist, is a self-described misogynist. I mean, Nick Fuentes is like cartoonishly bad. And Tucker wants to defend him. Okay? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, Pat Buchanan had the one issue, which was riding the fence on anti-Semitism. Tucker Carlson, who I do not believe is an anti-Semite, I want to stress that part, okay, has at this point a laundry list. It's becoming a pattern. Always defending America's enemies, weirdly pro-Islam, always defending deplorable people like Fuentes and West and Andrew Tate. On top of that, you have things that border on anti-Semitic every now and then. And it just gets to a point eventually where it's like, I don't trust Tucker Carlson anymore. I used to. And it took a while for me to get to this point. And I still will, when people say I think Tucker's an anti-Semite, I still will defend them and say, no, I don't think he is. Okay. I don't think that Tucker holds some sort of personal animosity towards Jews. That being said, this is not the same thing as Buckley v. Buchanan. And Buckley v. Buchanan is still way more complex and complicated than you guys like it to be. So what are the answers to these things? All right. Well, on the first issue, I love William F. Buckley and I love Pat Buchanan. Okay. I think responsible conservatism needs to realize that both of them were brilliant thinkers that furthered our movement, that furthered our cause, that we can take a lot from while also realizing they made mistakes. Okay. Buckley should not have run Buchanan out of town. Buchanan should not have supported the weirdly Nazi apologetic things that he had supported, right? As it pertains to the current issue, look, while I might agree with some of Tucker's overall political ideology more, and in fact, Tucker had a lot to do with me becoming a traditionalist conservative, on the current issues he's battling, Ben Shapiro simply is correct. He goes a little too far in labeling Tucker an anti-Semite, but he simply is correct. Okay, Tucker is weird. Now, I don't like the pro-Islamic stuff. I don't like supporting people who are credibly accused of sexual assault and who, even if they aren't guilty of sexual assault, are pornographers and are bordering on sex trafficking. I don't like that. Okay, I don't like guys who consistently want to defend my enemies. Don't like it. I don't like guys who say, hey, this dude who self-describes as an incel, a misogynist, an authoritarian, a fascist, we should start listening to him. I don't like that. If that's the bed Tucker wants to lay in, my hands are washed of that conservatism. And yours should be too. That doesn't mean you need to abandon the values, okay? If you still think we shouldn't be an interventionist, that's fine. Matt Walsh doesn't think we should be an interventionist. Listen to him. Why you got to listen to Tucker, right? Listen to me. I don't think we should be involved in foreign wars, right? If you still think that, if you're still an anti-Zionist, obviously I'm not, but you can hold that position. You still are an American nationalist, you could hold that position also, right? But you don't have to hold these weird getting into bed with evil people positions that Tucker Carlson seems to be holding to. And with all that being said, I still don't think Tucker should be excommunicated from the movement. I think Tucker should be strongly rebuked for the views that he has been parroting that are wrong, right? But when Tucker says something right, support him. High fives all around. You know what I mean? Thank you for speaking the truth. Truth to power, as the liberals like to say, right? But we're not going to say that. So that's my way too long thoughts on the Buckley v. Buchanan issue and on the Tucker v. Shapiro issue. Let's now get to the headliner. Is Christianity about to be criminalized in Canada? Is Christianity about to be criminalized in Canada? So for those of you who do not know, there has been a bill passed in Canada, or that is going to be passed. I guess I'm not sure if it's been passed quite yet, called C9, okay? That is essentially a new hate crime bill, okay? We're going to be reading a lot about this, but a lot of people, so it's also known as the Combating Hate Act. And a lot of people have been wondering, is this going to ultimately lead to criminalizing genuinely held religious beliefs and making it illegal to teach the scriptures in certain ways, right? And we're going to go ahead and read a little bit about that. We're going to start with this article from CBC, okay? And we'll read a little bit about C9 itself. In fact, our next special report might just be on C9. But Bloc wants liberal bill amended to remove religious exemption from hate speech laws per source. Criminal code change to be proposed at committee studying anti-hate legislation. This was originally posted December the 3rd, 2025. That is 16 days ago. We'll get you an update on this at the end of this article, but I think it's a good article to accurately describe why people are worried about this. The Bloc Québécois, I think I said that right, is planning to introduce an amendment to a Liberal government bill that would remove religious exemption from Canada's hate speech laws, a source has told CBC News. The criminal code currently includes an exemption for hate speech if in good faith the person expressed or, this is a quote, if in good faith the person expressed or attempted to establish by an argument an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a belief in a religious text, end quote. In other words, if you say homosexuality is an abomination, Leviticus 18:22, that is considered protected, whereas just saying homosexuality is an abomination without any religious background might not be considered protected in Canada. That's a short, sweet example of what's being said here, okay? The Bloc is expected to introduce the amendment to remove that section of the code as part of Bill C9. dubbed the Combating Hate Act, during a clause-by-clause review at the House Justice Committee on Thursday afternoon. Of course, this was originally published on December the 3rd, right? Which I actually believe was a Wednesday. So this would have been the day after, if I am remembering correctly. I think I am. CBC News has agreed not to name the source because they weren't authorized to speak publicly about the proposed amendment. The National Post reported earlier this week that the Liberals would support the amendment in order to pass C9. CBC News has not confirmed that such a deal is in the works. Again, we'll read more about that here in just a moment. Justice Minister Sean Fraser previously seemed open to the committee exploring the idea of removing the religious exemption. He said, quote, "I invite the committee to hear from witnesses on that. If the majority of members agree to make this change, I see no problem with it," end quote, the minister told the committee last month. Mark Miller, who had been chairing the Justice Committee before being promoted to cabinet earlier this week, said Wednesday that he was also open to the exemption. This really is, quote, "This really is, I don't think people should be using the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah to escape from committing a hate crime or claim that the hate, what would otherwise be a hate crime, is done in the name of a religious text," end quote, Miller told reporters on Parliament Hill. So you can see here, right, exactly why people are labeling this as a attack on Christianity. Look, let's be perfectly frank about some things, guys. There are a lot of things that the Bible says that the world considers hate speech. I want to be very careful on how I say that, because these things are not actually hateful. The scripture is not hateful, okay? I want to be very clear on that. But the world certainly considers many things which are found in the scriptures to be hate speech. I already mentioned one such thing. The Bible says unequivocally that homosexuality is an abomination, okay? Leviticus 18:22, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." Okay? Abomination is a detestable thing, a repulsive, disgusting thing. Okay? And Leviticus says quite plainly that that is detestable, that homosexual acts are detestable. Okay? It's not as if it's the only place where scripture says something of this sort. So, for example, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 6 through 11, famously says that homosexuals, both the receiving partner and the giving partner, will not inherit the kingdom of God. It says that quite plainly, right? There's no other way you can interpret that other than homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, this is apart from grace. It goes on to say, "Such were some of you," right? We certainly believe that Christ is able to change the hearts and minds of individuals, right? But it is unequivocally the case that the scripture says homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of God, right? What's another example? Well, Genesis 19 very plainly suggests that the problem with the Sodomites and Gomorrites, in fact, we even use the term sodomite to this day to refer to homosexuality, was that they were going to commit an act of rape, but specifically an act of homosexual rape. And while I don't think Lot is meant to be the good guy necessarily in the story for offering up his daughters, the fact that they will not take the daughters, but in fact want to assault the males, is taken as like, see, they're an even higher level of debaucherous, right? Leviticus 20:13. If a man lies with a male as lying with a woman, they both committed an abomination, they shall certainly die. Right? That again is by the world's standard, that is absolutely hate speech. It is an unequivocal statement that according to the law of Moses, homosexuality is punishable by death. Now, We can add all the caveats we want here, right? I'm not saying that government should go out and the government should go out and execute homosexuals. That's not what I'm saying. The law of Moses does say that, though. Okay? And for Christians, it's important for us to recognize the law of Moses says that, because when we go and witness to a gay man, we're telling them, hey, you need to repent of your sin, because according to the scriptures, your sin is worthy of death. Now, according to the scriptures, my sin is worthy of death too. See, that's the reason we all need a savior. But that's not the point here. The point is that's considered to be hate speech. Let me give another, this is just on homosexuality. Let's give another example, right? How many things in the scripture do people interpret as being hate speech towards Jews? Now, of course, they ignore the fact that the very people saying these things are Jews, right? Paul's clearly not anti-Semitic. He's a Semite. He's a Jew, right? Jesus is a Jew. But nevertheless, how many texts do people look at as saying this is anti-Semitic? Tons of them. Tons of them. For example, there are people who interpret, what is this? I'm going to have to look it up because I don't remember it off the top of my head. Shoot, where is it? It's the text where Paul says the Jews are enemy of all mankind, right? Man, I wish I remembered which text that was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There is that point there, right? There is the fact that the Jewish leaders saying his blood is on our hands, right? So they take credit for killing Jesus Christ. They reject Jesus Christ, reject their own Messiah, right? Which is stated plainly all throughout the scriptures. There is anti-pluralist language in the scripture, which says that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. All other paths lead to hell. Islam is not a perfectly valid religion. Okay, Mormonism is not a perfectly valid religion. Hinduism is not a perfectly valid religion. They lead to hell and damnation. Scripture's clear about that, right? And while I don't believe the Jewish stuff is anti-Semitic, it is necessarily clear, or it is absolutely clear, rather, that the scripture says the Jews executed Jesus Christ. That's a fact, okay? Now, it also says that the Romans executed Christ. If you're an anti-Semite trying to use that against the Jewish people, well, guess what? It puts the blame on your people as well, right? It's Jew and Gentile working together to execute the Son of God. But that's not what people hear. What people hear is, oh, you blame the Jews for killing Jesus Christ, and that is considered anti-Semitic. What about, I suffer not a woman to teach? What about wives submit to your husbands? Is that misogynistic? Well, the world certainly thinks so. The world certainly thinks so. What about he created them male and female, or cross-dressing is an abomination? Is that transphobic? Well, the world certainly thinks so, right? So when the Canadian government is sitting here saying we want hate crime legislation to apply to sincerely held religious beliefs, or at least when members of the Canadian government are saying that, they are quite plainly saying what Pierre Poilievre says right here. I think I said his name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. This change would, quote, criminalize sections of the Bible, Quran, Torah, and other sacred texts. He is exactly right about that. If you are able to persecute what you perceive to be hate speech in sincerely held religious beliefs, well, guess what? You perceive a whole lot of the Old and New Testament to be hate speech, to be misogynistic, to be anti-Semitic, to be pro-slavery, to be transphobic and homophobic and etc. Right? Doesn't matter that I don't think that, because when I say homosexuality is an abomination, you're going to say recant from that, or you're being homophobic. In fact, I challenge any liberals who may be watching this. Do you think the phrase homosexuality is an abomination and deserving of death before God is homophobic? If you do, then guess what? You're saying the Bible is homophobic. And if the Bible is homophobic according to your definition, and that definition becomes law, which it is in Canada, then that means the Bible becomes criminalized. Christianity and Orthodox Judaism become criminalized. Okay? It's just the fact of the matter. All right? Now, returning to this article, it does say conservatives have been pushing back against the idea of removing religious exemptions clause of the criminal code. We read that quote. This would criminalize sections of the Bible, Quran, Torah, and other sacred texts. I don't really care so much for the defense of the Quran because the Quran is evil. But that being said, I don't think it should be illegal to be a Muslim. I just think that it's evil to be a Muslim. You know, within certain parameters, you do have a right to be evil. Nobody should arrest you for being racist, but being racist is evil, right? Andrew Lawton, a conservative MP on the Justice Committee, similarly said the amendment would trample on freedom of expression. He says, quote, I'm going to continue to hold the line on this. My conservative colleagues are going to continue to stand up for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and religious freedom, end quote. Bill C9 proposes new criminal code offenses, including one that would make it a crime to intentionally promote hatred against identifiable groups in public using certain hate or terrorism-related symbols. These symbols include ones used during the Holocaust, such as the swastika or SS lightning bolts, or symbols associated with the government's list of terrorist entities, which includes the Proud Boys, Hamas, and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, it's important to note here, by the way, the Proud Boys have never committed an act of terrorism. Never happened. Never happened. That's not the point of this episode, so we're going to leave it there. But never happened. There's not one single instance of Proud Boys terrorism ever in the history of the entire planet. Okay? But we'll move on from that. The legislation would also make hate-motivated crimes a specific offense and crack down on willfully intimidating and obstructing people outside places of worship and other sensitive institutions. On Wednesday morning, a coalition that includes civil liberties, community, and labor groups called the government to withdraw the bill entirely. Tim McSorley of the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group said during a news conference that the bill threatens free expression, freedom of assembly, and the ability to engage in protest and dissent, which, for the record, that's also true. One of the things that makes America, in my personal unbiased opinion, superior to other nations, and I don't mean superior in the, well, yeah, I kind of do. This is the greatest country on earth. I don't care, right? I believe that. Frankly, if you're a Canadian, you should believe that about your country. I think you're wrong, but you should believe that about your country, right? Anyway, one of the things that makes America better than other countries, in my opinion, is the fact that you do have a right to wear symbols that other people find offensive, right? You don't have a right to intimidate people, and you know, there are ways that you can do that are illegal, right? Like, for example, if you go commit acts of anti-Semitic vandalism, well, that's vandalism. If you go attack a Jewish person for being a Jew, well, that's assault, right? But should people have a right to own a Nazi flag if they decide to? Here, let's actually make this question even more complicated, because that's just a question that pertains to Nazis. What if I'm a Jew. What if I want to own a Nazi flag just for historical purposes? It's a piece of history. Maybe I want to own a piece of history. Should that be allowed? I happen to think that the Confederate flag is a symbol of historical preservation. Should that be allowed? I happen to think that Messianic Judaism is a legitimate expression of Jewish faith. Other people think Messianic Judaism is anti-Semitic, which is insane, by the way. But should I be allowed to wear Messianic Jewish symbols? A lot of these people might say no. I think absolutely the answer is yes. But even the hardcore examples of this, should you be allowed to wear a hammer and sickle or a swastika in public if that's what you believe? I don't see how anybody who truly believes in freedom can say no. That doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't mean those things aren't evil. Communism is evil. Nazism is evil. And you should fight against it. And you should frown upon and socially shame people who wear that kind of stuff in public. But should they be criminals? Should they be criminals? If they're not committing a criminal act, then no, of course not. right? At any rate, McSorley of the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, I already read that. McSorley made the comments alongside representatives from the Public Service Alliance of Canada, the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, and Independent Jewish Voices. If the bill clears committee, it will face a final vote in the House before being sent off to the Senate. Now, again, this was written in December the 3rd. On December the 3rd, excuse me. My understanding is that the bill has not been passed yet. I think it has been sent to the Senate. But I don't think it has yet actually been passed. So just note that here for the record as we return to this. Now, I want to read to you guys a little bit about the bill itself, from the bill itself. Maybe we should save this for a special report. It's not necessary. Let's go ahead and look at it. So this is Bill C9. Oh, I don't have my screen sharing the right thing. Sorry, guys. And that there. Go over here. So this is Bill C9. An act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. The act may be cited as the Combating Hate Act. That's its short title. Criminal Code. Paragraph A of the definition offense in Section 183 of the Criminal Code is amended by adding the following after subparagraph. Section 423.3, intimidation, building used for religious worship, etc. Subsection 318.3 of the Act is repealed. Subsection 319 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subsection. Willful promotion of hatred, terrorism, and hate symbols, quote, everyone commits an offense who willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group by displaying in any public place a symbol that is principally used by or principally associated with a listed entity as defined in subsection 83.01, or the Nazi Hakenkreuz, also known as the swastika, or the Nazi double sigrun, also known as the SS bolts, or a symbol that so nearly resembles a symbol described in paragraph A or B that it is likely to be confused with that symbol. Which, by the by, this seems like an important time to mention that a lot of symbols look like swastikas, including Indian swastikas, which are not associated with Nazism. Punishment. Everyone who commits an offense under subsection 2.2 is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or is guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction. Defenses, subsection 2.2. No person shall be convicted of an offense under subsection 2.2, quote, A, if the display of the symbol was for a legitimate purpose, including a legitimate purpose related to journalism, religion, education, or art that is not contrary to public interest, or if in good faith the display of the symbol was intended to point out for the purpose of removal matters producing or tending to produce feelings of hatred toward an identifiable group in Canada. Remember, this portion here is the one they want to get rid of. Display of the symbol for a legitimate purpose, including religion. That's the main area that they want to get rid of, right? The other areas not so much, but it's the religious exemption clause that they want to be removed from this bill. If a person is convicted of an offense under subsections 1, 2, 2.1, or 2.2, 1, 2, 2.1, or 2.2, if you guys were not clear on that, or section 318, anything by means of or in relation to which the offense was committed, on such conviction may, in addition to any other punishment imposed, be ordered by the presiding provincial court judge or judge to be forfeited to His Majesty in right of the province in which that person is convicted for disposal as the Attorney General may direct. Sorry, I worded that terribly. Exemption from seizure of communication facilities, subsections 1996 and 7, with any modifications that the circumstances require to subsection 1, 2, 2.1, or 2.2, or section 318. Clarification. For greater certainty, the communication of a statement does not incite or promote hatred for the purposes of this section solely because it discredits, humiliates, hurts, or offends. Subsection 319.7 of the Act is amended by adding the following in alphabetical order. Hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification that is stronger than disdain or dislike. The Act is amended by adding the following section in 321. Offenses motivated by hatred, 320.1001. Everyone who commits an offense referred to in this section as the included offense under this act or any act of parliament, if the commission of the included offense is motivated by hatred based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to the punishment provided for in subsection 5, or guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction. Now notice there, the things it listed: hatred based on race, national, ethnic group, language, color, religion. Are you being anti-Islamic? Are you being anti-Semitic? Obviously, I don't think that the anti-Semitic things hold, but nevertheless, well, we said anything on the basis of religion. Do you claim the Jews killed Messiah? Do you claim Islam is incompatible with Western civilization? Do you claim there is only one way to salvation, that being Jesus Christ? Well, some might interpret that as hatred based on religion. What about sex? Do you think men should, or wives should submit to their husbands? Do you think that women should not be suffered to teach in church? Do you think that women should be told to dress modestly and not expose themselves physically to the world? Well, that could be considered hatred based off of sex. Sexual orientation or gender identity. Do you think a man is a man and a woman is a woman, that God created them male and female? Do you think that homosexuality is an abomination? Well, that could be considered hatred based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And they want to remove the religious exemption here. Recall that, which means you would be guilty of an indictable offense and liable to the punishment upwards of potential, as many as 2 years potentially in prison for saying homosexuality is an abomination. Right? I mean, just put the pieces together. I don't want the religious exemption. This is what the members of the liberal bloc of the Canadian government are saying. I don't want the religious exemption. And I do want to keep the part that says motivated by hatred based on, ellipsis, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, sex. What is the result? The result is saying things like, a man shall not lie with a man as he does with a woman. It is an abomination. Becomes a crime punishable by up to 2 years in prison. And if people think that's insane, just look at the things that are happening all across Europe already. We have people, Mark Meechan, Count Dankula, okay, went to prison for telling a joke about his dog giving a Nazi salute. Okay? So this is not like Tommy Robinson, another example, has gone to prison for inciting hatred against Muslims. This is absolutely where this goes, friends. And by the way, it's not just Christianity. That you notice that there were Jewish groups and Muslim groups that were protesting this as well. If this is applied consistently, and I don't think it'll be applied consistently to Muslims, because attacking Muslims for any reason whatsoever, including legitimate reasons, is just like the cardinal sin in liberal countries. But at the very least, will this be used against Orthodox Jews? I think probably. And if it's applied consistently, it'll absolutely be used against Muslims as well. I'm going to put these glasses back on. My eyes are going. In this section, hatred, I'm going back to the bill. In this section, hatred has the same meaning as in subsection 319.7. Clarification. For greater certainty, the commission of an offense under this act or any other act of parliament is not, for the purposes of this section, motivated by hatred based on any of the factors mentioned in subsection 1, solely because it discredits, humiliates, hurts, or offends. No proceedings shall be commenced under subsection 1 by way of indictment if the included offense may be prosecuted only by way of summary conviction proceedings. Maximum penalties. Everyone who is found guilty of an indictable offense under subsection 1 is liable to a term of imprisonment not more than, and earlier it said 2 years, now it says 5 years, if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 2 years or more, but less than 5 years. 10 years if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 5 years, but more or more, but less than 10 years. 14 years if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 10 years or more, but less than 14 years, or life if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offense is 14 years or more and up to imprisonment for life. Applicable provisions. Subject to paragraphs 1A and B and subsections 4 and 5, any provision of this act or any other act of Parliament, including one in respect to procedure, orders, or consequences that would have been applicable in relation to the included offenses, applies in relation to an offense under subsection 1. The act is amended by adding the following section to 423.2. Intimidation, building used for religious worship. Every person commits an offense who engages in any conduct with the intent to provoke a state of fear in a person in order to impede their access to a building or structure or part of a building or structure that is primarily used for religious worship or by an identifiable group as defined by subsection 318.4. That would include abortion clinics, by the way. For administrative, social, cultural, or sports activities or events as an educational institution, including daycare center, or as a residence for seniors or a cemetery. Obstructions or interference with access. We're almost done with the bill here. Every person commits an offense who, without lawful authority, intentionally obstructs or interferes with another person's lawful access to a building or structure or part of a building or structure referred to in paragraph 1A or to a cemetery. Punishment. Every person who commits an offense under subsections 1 or 2 is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 10 years or guilty of an offense punishable by summary conviction. Exception. No person is guilty of an offense under subsection 2 by reason only that they attend at or near or approach a building or structure referred to in paragraph 1A or a cemetery for the purpose only of obtaining or communicating information. Subsections 434.1 and 4.101 of the Act are repealed. Paragraph C of the definition secondary designated offense in section 487.04 of the Act is amended by adding the following after subparagraph XI.01. XI.02, subsection 423.3, 1, intimidation, building used for religious worship, etc. Subsection 515.4.1 of the Act is amended by adding the following after paragraph B.11. B.12, an offense under subsection 423.3, 1, intimidation, building used for religious worship, etc. Paragraph 515.4.3b of the Act is replaced by the following. An offense described in section 264 or 423.1 or subsection 423.2, 1, or 423.3, 1. Section 662 of this Act is amended by adding the following after subsection 6. Offense under subsection 320.10011 charged. For greater certainty, if a count charges an offense or subsection under 320.10011 and the offense does not, and the evidence, does not prove that offense but proves an included offense, the accused may be found guilty of the offense that is proved. The Act is amended by adding the following after section 726.2. Endorsement, offense under subsection 320.10011. 726.21. When an offender is found guilty of an offense under subsection 320.10011, the court shall endorse on the information or indictment as the case may be the included offense that has been proved by the evidence, and in the absence of evidence to the contrary, the endorsement is proof of that fact. Coming into force 30th day after royal assent, this act comes into force on the 30th day after the day on which it receives royal assent. So if it is passed, it will come into effect 30 days after it is passed. So, friends, it is not in any stretch of the imagination an exaggeration to say that this bill, if the religious exemptions are revoked, could criminalize Christianity in Canada. Okay. I have some Canadian friends that may disagree with my saying that. I would challenge them to defend this bill, whether it be against me or just publicly in general, right? And I don't think they could do so, quite frankly. I think the bill entirely needs to be tossed out, but especially this idea that they're going to toss out the religious exemption just needs to be laughed out with scorn. It is an absurd idea. Canada, which used to be a Christian nation, I might add, is essentially trying to argue for the criminalization of Christianity by way of saying hate speech, which is already a nebulous and ill-defined term, does not get a religious exemption. If you say homosexuality is an abomination and add Leviticus 18:22, we're not going to say that that's somehow legitimate just because you added Leviticus 18:22. That's hate speech. Sorry, no, it is not. It is absolutely not hate speech. First off, it's the truth. Second off, even if I didn't think it was the truth, people have a right to their beliefs. You can't say that this thing which we all thought was wrong up until like 50 years ago, for the overwhelming majority of human existence, in the overwhelming majority of human societies, that all of a sudden it's actually, not only is that not wrong, but it's wrong to think that's wrong. Sorry, that's not how real life works. Okay? You don't get to just arbitrarily declare that being against homosexuality is hate. Are there people out there who do have true hate? Sure. Conceded. Granted. What's your point? There are people out there who have genuine hate for a lot of things. There are real life racists. There are real life people who want to persecute atheists. There are real life people who want to persecute straight people. There are real life people. I mean, heck, we just saw over the last 3 years like 9 different transgender mass shootings and assassination attempts. Right? Does that mean that you should be arrested for advocating for transgender rights? No. Nor should I be arrested for advocating that transgenderism be banned, which I do advocate for the record. Should that be... Hold up, Canada. Did I just commit a hate crime? Of course you guys think I would, right? In the government, I mean. I'm not blaming individual Canadians for this. Although you guys do keep electing these guys, okay, which I think is a problem. I think it's a very big problem. There was other stuff we wanted to talk about here as well, but I'm wondering if perhaps we're running out of time. So I'll go through a speed round here just to talk about a few brief things. But I want to just end this point by saying pray for Canada. Pray for Canada. And if you are Canadian watching this show, fight. Obviously not physically, but fight. Fight this. This is tyranny by dictionary definition. And just because it hasn't gotten to the point yet where people are being outright persecuted doesn't mean it won't. In fact, this is the first step. And well, maybe not the first step, but it's a major step towards outright persecution of Christians and probably Orthodox Jews as well, for the record. All right, let's go through a quick speed round here real quick of things I wanted to talk about, but unfortunately will not have enough time to. Ballot initiative to end Idaho's abortion ban has more than 50,000 signatures. This was published on November the 25th, 2025. There is a ballot initiative to legalize abortion in Idaho. If they are able to get 71,000 signatures, then they will actually send this to the to referendum for the population to vote on. This is, of course, a horrible, horrible news because whether or not, well, let me put it this way. Whether or not a state is right-wing and conservative seems to have almost no impact on whether or not they defend life. The ballot initiative here, which so far has not gotten its full 71,000 signatures, so for those who don't know, Idaho has a strict abortion ban in its constitution. Okay. If they qualify for the initiative, then they would send this to be voted upon. And if the population voted over 50%, yes, get rid of this initiative, then they would in fact get rid of this constitutional amendment, and there would be no strict abortion ban constitutionally enshrined in Idaho anymore. Okay. Now, some people might say Idaho's super red, though, so why are you worried about anything? Well, because unfortunately, a lot of states that are super red don't really seem to care about massacring babies. Okay. Florida, which is super red, did end up shooting down protections of abortion, but only because the ballot needed 60% vote and it only got 58. That's still over half, though. Missouri, super red, did pass constitutionally enshrined protections for abortion. Montana, super red, could not get a born alive bill passed in 2022. They wanted to pass a bill that says if a baby is born alive, doctors must care for it. They couldn't get that passed in super red Montana, right? North Carolina is another one, super red, and is just going entirely backwards on the life issue. Okay, let's be perfectly clear. Abortion is a euphemism. What we're actually talking about is the massacre of preborn humans. Okay, that is what this is. And unfortunately, as much as I would like to believe my state would do the right thing here, I'm not confident. I am not confident. I think that by and large, the American people, just like any other people on this planet, are stupid and evil, if I'm being completely honest with you. Unfortunately, we live in an age that is filled to the brim with stupid and evil people. Okay. And willfully stupid at that. It's not like they lack intellectual capacity. They just don't care to learn. Okay. Abortion is murder. It is the murder of preborn babies. Okay. I really hope that this ballot initiative does not have success, but I am here to report that unfortunately it is currently already at 50,000 signatures. And if it does get passed, then one of the safe havens for babies in this world will no longer be so. And that would be a absolutely horrible thing. Speaking of pro-life, Patrick Bryce is sentenced to home detention for attack on elderly pro-life supporters. Patrick Bryce attacked Mark Crosby, 73, and Richard Schaefer, 84, on May 26, 2023, when they were outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic in Baltimore. These are, of course, two elderly individuals, okay? He attacked them, knocking over Schaefer, who suffered scrapes and bruises, and beating Crosby, who suffered permanent eye damage and would end up spending time in Maryland shock trauma after being pushed, punched, and kicked while down. And the judge in this case, Yvette Bryant, did not sentence the attacker, Patrick Bryce, to any sort of prison time for assault on two elderly individuals. Rather, she sentenced him to 1 year home detention and 3 years on probation. Right? I mean, what else do you even have to say about that? What else do you even have to say about that? The judge in this instance, another idiot activist judge who should be disbarred and prevented from ever practicing law again for things like this, is deciding yet again to let a violent criminal off the hook. Why let this violent criminal off the hook? Well, because he said he was sorry, which is ridiculous. And by the way, I hate to say it because I know there are a lot of right-minded women that watch this show. But let's be honest, is it a shock that it's a female judge? No. No, it's not. No, it's not. And she's a registered Democrat. She is a black woman. Obviously, there are plenty of good black judges, but she is definitely not one of them. It does kind of reek of that thing that shan't be named unless you be called racist. DEI. Right? Is it a shock to anyone? No, it isn't. Is justice served in this case? No, of course it wasn't. Obviously. Right? What essentially happened here is a judge said Well, as long as the people you assaulted were pro-life activists, we'll go easy on you. So not only does this tacitly endorse violence against pro-life activists, 84 and 73 years old, I might add, but it's also just another example. Did we learn nothing from the Zarutska case? This is a violent criminal who will be out on the streets within a year and who will serve no prison time at all. So how do we know? Maybe Patrick Bryce ends up coming up behind some girl and stabbing her to death or lighting her on fire on a train station. I don't know, but I'm saying there's been a pattern of violent criminals who are let out on the streets committing heinous acts like this one. And then they want to blame things like, oh, well, racism, well, right-wing extremism. Oh my gosh, Jay, did you really point out that this is a woman judge? Yeah, I did. You want to know why? Because it's consistently liberal women who are letting these people off the hook. To all the conservative women listening to this, I'm not talking about you, so please don't get offended, okay? Liberal women consistently voting for policies that put violent criminals on the streets. And when they get in positions of power like Yvette Bryant has, making sure those criminals get put back on the streets. It's insanity, friends. Just real quick, let's look at the Maryland punishment for assault. I don't happen to know what it is off the top of my head. Maryland's penalty for assault, if it's a misdemeanor, is 10 years in prison and a $25,000 fine, up to 10 years in prison and a $25,000 fine. While first-degree felony assault, which would have to involve serious injury, a firearm, or strangulation. By the way, remember, this guy is now going partially blind in his eye, so that counts as serious injury. Penalties up to 25 years in prison. Did he get 25 years in prison? Did he get 10 years in prison? Did he get 1 year in prison? No, because some idiot liberal woman decided that he's not going to get any time in prison at all. So there's that. That's another thing we wanted to address here really quickly. Also wanted to talk a little bit about the Pondy Beach shooting. It is Hanukkah. And of course, as you guys know, I identify as a Christian Jew. I don't subscribe to this idea that you stop being Jewish just because you're a Christian. I celebrate Hanukkah here in this house. I just celebrate it as a Christian. And even if I didn't, of course, heart would go out to people who are killed here. What do we know? Well, father and son Sajid Akram and Navid Akram killed 15 people, including a 10-year-old girl. Oh, I have somebody in my comment section saying it's pronounced Bondi. My apologies. Bondi Beach. Thank you for that, by the way. I appreciate that tremendously. I'm noticing now that I'm reading the live chat that Sandy is saying a lot of the same things that I'm saying right before I say them. That's awesome. I am glad that we have like-minded individuals here. That's very cool. Also, Shalom, thank you for being here. Same thing with you. Rebuke and Reprove, thank you very much for being here as well. And Nunya Biz, thank you also for being here. Oh, and Michael the Canadian Atheist was here. I don't know if he's still here. No, it says he's not. Okay. Well, Shalom, and thank you for being here as well. I strongly disagree. If you are still here, Michael, maybe we should talk about it at some point. All right. Bondi Beach. So we had Sajid Akram and Navid Akram, not Akrim, sorry. Sajid is dead. Navid is in the hospital. The two ended up shooting up a Hanukkah celebration, killing 15 people. I think actually the number is up to 16 now, the youngest of which is a 10-year-old girl. The act was an act of Islamic terrorism, shocker, directed against Jews for the crime of being Jews. And it is one of a large number of terrorist attacks. Another Bondi Beach terrorist attack from Islamic extremists, was thwarted, I think, either yesterday or 2 days ago. There was an Islamic terrorist attack at Brown University roughly 4 days ago, I think. It might have been 5 days ago. And there was an Islamic terrorist attack on American base, in Syria about 5 days ago. And there was an Islamic terrorist attack against 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. So a lot of Islamic terrorist attacks ramping up here, right? Now, I want to point out here real quick that there was a man, I don't know if he was a Christian Arab or a Muslim Arab, but nevertheless, there was an immigrant man, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, who disarmed one of the gunmen, and I believe he ended up getting shot as a result. I believe he's alive. But nevertheless, that man, regardless of if he's a Muslim or not, is, of course, a hero. We want to give massive credit to him for doing what he did there. That was awesome. In fact, I might even show you guys the video here because it's very cool. And obviously, I think Islam, the faith, is cancerous, but that does not mean that each individual Muslim is evil. Check this out. This is a very cool example of human bravery and heroism, if the video will actually load. What's going on here? Man. Here. Go to YouTube and check this out real quick, because now I want to show you guys. It's, like I said, it's very cool. Can we just get a short video of him disarming it? I don't want to watch the whole thing. Come on, guys. Maybe this one. Nope. Man, this is lame. This is super lame. I just wanted to show this video. It's a cool video, and I can't find just a short version of this video. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see here he was shot twice. Luckily, it was all in the arm, and I believe he is completely okay. I think he's still in the hospital. Check this out, though. Look at this. Right? I mean, what a boss. What an absolute legend. Personally, I think you should have shot the guy. That's just my own opinion, because you don't know if he's still an active threat. But at the very least, the man is in custody. So, there's no lack of justice done here. I mean, how cool is that, right? That did my heart some good. I'm glad to see there are people out there who are heroic enough to put their lives on the line to stop acts of terror like this. Unarmed, by the way, completely unarmed, just decides to jump the guy from behind and take his firearm and turn the firearm back on him. Super cool. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, wherever you are, you're a hero. And prayers to you. If you are a Muslim, hopefully you come to see the light of Christ. But nevertheless, you are still a hero for that. Yeah, like I said, the shooting is believed to have killed 16. I do not recall how many were wounded. And it was an act of anti-Semitic terrorism, specifically Islamic anti-Semitic terrorism, because of course it was, right? To be a Jew is like one of the greatest crimes anyone can commit in Islam, it seems. Let me go ahead and look here. So I said 16. It's actually 15 people who were killed here. And How many were wounded? 40 people, including at least 2 police officers, were injured. Okay, so 15 people were killed. So I guess, you know what it probably was? When it says 16 people, because I did read 16 people, I think it was one of the gunmen. Because this here says 2 gunmen killed 15 people, and then one of the gunmen also died. So there's 16 total, but one is the gunman. So 15 people were killed, 40 were wounded. One of the perpetrators is dead. The other is currently in the hospital, and of course will be charged after. The attack is the deadliest terror incident and second deadliest mass shooting in modern Australian history. It has been confirmed to be linked to ISIS, which, believe it or not, does still exist. And it has been proven to be a deliberate attack on Jewish people during the first day of Hanukkah in order to dissuade them from celebrating Hanukkah. So we wanted to report a little bit on that, and of course, ask for prayers for the victims, and for protections, of course, for both Jewish and Christian people around. Because here's the thing, man. Not only do Muslims like to go after people celebrating Hanukkah, guess what? They like to go after people celebrating Christmas also. And unfortunately, considering how many Islamic terrorist attacks have happened in the last month's time, I would be genuinely shocked if there was no terrorist attacks this Christmas. I don't have any inside sources. I'm just guessing. But I'm going to be very honest with you. In a week's time, a week from now is going to be December 26th. I will be very stunned if we wake up December 26th and there have been no anti-Christmas terrorist attacks, because it does seem like there is a ramp up of terrorism recently. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong about that. And I'd love to not see any more attacks on my Jewish compatriots as well. But nevertheless, that was another thing we wanted to talk about. And then just one last thing. Israeli forces kill Palestinian men in West Bank after they appeared to surrender. This is linked with, at least in terms of its content, with the attacks on drug boats. Pete Hegseth is being accused of committing a war crime for having the planes circle back around and kill survivors. Both of these things are being described as war crimes, right? In the case of Israel, found 2 Islamic militants, disarmed them, and then shot them after they were disarmed and surrendered. In the case of Pete Hegseth, he attacked a drug boat and then ordered them to circle back around and attack the drug boat to make sure there were no survivors. Both of these are being considered war crimes. And I just wanted to report on them very briefly to say, look, any loss of life is horrible. Sometimes it's necessary. Okay. We do not glory in the death of the wicked. God doesn't even glory in the death of the wicked, Ezekiel 33:11. However, the death of the wicked is sometimes a necessary thing. And in cases of war, not only is raising a flag of no quarter normal, but it is sometimes necessary. Why? Number one, it ensures that these people will not come back to attack you in the future. Number two, it sends a message, a psychological message. Do not mess with us. We will destroy you. Okay. The Allies did this in Dresden. We obviously nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We firebombed Tokyo. There was Sherman's famous March to the Sea during the American Civil War. This is normal combat behavior. Is it horrible? Of course it is. Combat's horrible. It's always horrible. Okay. But that's why people shouldn't try to get into wars in the first place. War is evil. War is wicked. War is cruel. War is sometimes necessary to be fought in order to stop evil people. Now, I will say, as it pertains to the Venezuela issue at least, that the United States government does need to go about it in a more constitutional way. If we are going to declare war on cartels, then get a formal declaration of war and go to war with the cartels. Also, I don't really think there's any reason to be going to war with Venezuela. Unless, of course, they're getting in our way with this. In the case of Israel, they are in a state of declared war, so there's nothing to criticize here. But I just wanted to mention these 2 articles because we are currently living in a post-rational world where people think that acts of war are war crimes. Acts of war are not war crimes. Flags of no quarter are very much normal in times of war. Torture is a war crime. Deliberately targeting civilians is a war crime. Mutilation of bodies is a war crime. Kidnapping is a war crime. Kidnapping like children and citizens and stuff like that. Sexual assault is a war crime. Those are war crimes. Okay. And by the way, here's the other thing. War crimes in terms of international law are illegitimate to begin with. Okay. There's no such thing as international law. Law derives from legitimate governments. There is no such thing as a legitimate international government. Now, individual nations should police their own war crimes, but let's just be perfectly clear. There is no such thing as a international law, in my honest opinion. So let's just get that. Anyway, that is our episode for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Please do share this to your social media platforms. The more people we can get to watch it, the better. Also, please do consider subscribing. We're currently at, I believe, 92 subs. If we could get to 100 subs by the end of this year, that would be awesome. That would be absolutely awesome. So please do share this with your friends. Encourage people to subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't done so. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything of that nature, throw them in the comment section down below. And we're going to try and do this every week, at least once every week on Fridays, because I want to make sure we're doing it on the same day. But maybe twice a week, maybe do some special reports. We'll see what happens. Want to remind you guys to be watchdogs, think like a Neanderthal, and ask yourself this question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?